Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Annette Young. So what is the scariest thing about growing older? It might be when you realise political leaders are your age or even younger, or when people come to you for advice and not the other way around. But as we fight the inevitable and refuse to age, do we ever really grow up? New York Times columnist and Paris-based author Pamela Druckerman has decided to write about her journey on becoming middle-aged. It's called There Are No Grown-Ups, a midlife coming-of-age story, and she joins me in the studio today. Thank you so much for coming in, Pamela. Now, you have really told me what I've suspected all along, that really there are no grown-ups. There's just a lot of older-looking kids, but some are better at faking it than others.
Well, I start out the book very surprised when I entered my 40s that people are treating me like a grown-up. It feels like it was just yesterday that I was, I was a kid, a sort of hapless child. And then, so I felt at the beginning like I was sort of faking it. But then I started to realize as I've moved further into my 40s that there were substantial changes, not just on the outside to my face, but on the inside to my mind. So I wanted to study this transition and see if other people were experiencing the same ambivalence, shall we say, about being considered a kind of full adult.
But, we talked a little bit about the fake imposter syndrome, and that's something that women are very au fait with, because if you talk to a lot of women, as I know you did, there is a sense among us that we really don't deserve to be here. We're really not who we say we are, and somebody at some point is going to find this out.
I was shocked when I was interviewing people for this book by how many extremely accomplished women with fantastic degrees and great jobs still feel a kind of imposter syndrome. And I was shocked by how many men who had exactly the same status didn't feel any imposter syndrome at all. So I think it's up to women to become a little bit more confident and men to become a little bit less, and we can meet somewhere in the middle.
I call it God bless testosterone. Makes a world of difference. Now, your previous book, which was a massive bestseller across the world, Bringing Up Bebe, which is about being an American parent here in Paris, raising children in a French environment, did, as I say, extremely well. So was it just a sort of inevitable part of the writer's journey that you then look at the next stage of life, that is being middle-aged?
Well, the great thing about living in France is it just keeps giving you more material and information. It's such a dense culture, and it's almost as if wherever you look, whether it's parenting or aging, there's a kind of tradition and assumptions and very layered culture that can teach you things, not necessarily how to do it the French way, but it sheds light on what my own assumptions were as an American. So once I had done that with parenting, I found it was a natural progression to start sort of looking at aging because it was the phase that I was entering next.
Is there a great difference in the way the French view getting older versus the American views towards aging?
There are plenty of similarities, but there are some crucial differences, I think, especially for women. I found that the American model, and this, when I say model, it doesn't mean that everyone says this or believes this, but it's sort of the guiding principle, the narrative that's in the culture that we compare ourselves to. So the American way that I kind of grew up with was you should try to look as young as you can for as long as you possibly can. And then when that stops working, you kind of blame yourself and eventually you just give up and say, I don't care what anyone thinks anymore. And that never seemed like a very appealing model to me, to sort of try to look 35 for the rest of my life and eventually one day just kind of say, I don't, okay, I've gone into my own shell. And this idea that you reach a point where you don't care what anyone thinks seems kind of antisocial to me. So it was instructive for me to discover the French model, which is more or less that you should try to look like the best version of the age that you are. And that's a slight twist on the kind of Anglo-American model, but it really is much more relaxing and it seems to make a big difference.
But a turning point for you, which in a way led to you writing the book, is when you realised that people were starting to call you madam and not mademoiselle when you were here in Paris.
It's very stark in France. You go from everyone calling you mademoiselle, this is in waiters and cafes and anyone you meet on the street who crosses your path, to being called mademoiselle or madame ironically, to being called full-on madame all the time. And for me, that was just, in America, you can kind of, they say ma'am in some places in the South.
Or they say Ms.
Or they say Ms. But Madam was kind of a real shock to me, and it was a wake-up call.
Now, I'm going to read from you because there's a series of little graphics throughout your book about, which are all headlined, when you're in your 40s, when. And these are things that sort of, really do relate to. Of course, should I be outing myself here on television, but your age feels like a secret. You become impatient when scrolling down to your year of birth, having just reapplied for a passport. I know how that feels. And people are surprised when you reveal that you have 3 kids.
Yeah.
Just give me a sense of some other sort of personal anecdotes that you sort of relate to as a woman now in your 40s, and how it sort of gave you a bit of a jolt that, hang on, I am indeed this age.
I remember the first time I was in a French drugstore and the sales lady steered me very gently toward the anti-aging cream. I remember being at a dinner with a bunch of friends my age and everyone revealing that there was one sport their doctor told them they're no longer allowed to play. I remember, everyone at the table had one, myself included. They're just little small transitions. Names don't just pop into your head anymore quite as easily. You have to kind of draw them up from the bottom of your mind. But at the same time, I noticed that there were positives, both kind of neurologically and also physically. You have better judgment in your 40s. You're better at reading other people, which I think is one of the huge advantages of entering middle age. You become, in many ways, wiser. There's this test that I found when I was researching the book, where you look at a rectangular picture of somebody's eyes, and you have to guess what emotion they're feeling. And people in their 40s and 50s were better than people in any other age group of answering this, at this test. So it really is an age where you become less neurotic, and the studies show that as well, and your mind clears a bit, and you can actually take in more information about other people. And I think that is one of the great pleasures of life. It's a very simple pleasure, but it's really knowing what's going on.
Yeah, if you look at the media, we're all meant to be fearing the whole process of getting old.
Yeah, and I certainly am not immune to that. I think you can't escape your culture's script. But I think it's important to kind of understand what's happening, know what the cultural script is, and that at least takes some of the air out of it, takes away some of its power.
Now, as the host of the 51% of the network show on women, I mean, we often talk about this, that if aliens were to descend onto Earth, and if they relied on television and film to get some sort of sense of the population, they would think that every woman aged 40 and over had been killed off.
It is getting slightly better. I mean, you saw it with the Academy Awards, and there are a number of women over 40 who were nominated this year, and the winner was, I think, 60 for the best actress category. So there is, I feel like we're grappling at least with the cultural story about older women and trying to puncture it a bit.
But we bring a lot to the table in terms of as older people, as you just pointed out, and we are a sizable chunk of many countries' populations. Yet, however, there's still very little literature about this particular age group.
Well, there is a lot of scientific research. It started in the 90s and has continued over the last 25 years. So there's now a lot of data about what happens in midlife. And what was very interesting for me from this data is the fact that there's no point in life when you're the best at every single quality, every ability. There are different peaks for different abilities throughout the life course. And there are all these skills and abilities that are peaking when you're in your 40s and 50s and even into your 60s. So knowing that, I think, is a big relief.
What did you learn, however, from writing this book?
I think I figured out who I was. I mean, it's a great psychological experiment to write about your life and to see the forces that kind of came together to make you who you are. I'm not recommending that everyone out there write a book, but it's a great journey. And I ended up basically redefining what a grown-up is. By the end of the book, I decided that there really are grown-ups, but they're not these omnipotent, all-powerful creatures. To be a grown-up is smaller. It's more humble. It's to be good at a few things. It's to know yourself really well. It's to have a bit of wisdom. It's a kind of it's to be able to do a few things very well. So, I mean, maybe I conveniently redefined grown up so that I would finally be one. But I think I came to see what it really is and and to feel a little bit, at least some days, like I am one myself.
Well, I'm going to have to thank you, Pamela, because you have sort of summed it up for all of us as to what it does mean to be a grown-up and for us not to be afraid of the fact we are as old as we are. So I'm going to have to thank you for coming in. Thanks, Pamela. And that's it for this edition of the France 24 interview. Do stay with us here on France 24 because there are more news and headlines coming up very shortly.